Thanks. So I'll be talking about Learner Corpus Research and also things I wish someone had told me when I was a grad student. I'll give you more of a detailed outline in just a couple of slides here. How do I even turn to the next one? Okay, I guess I have to click. So I have a website. If you want to contact me or find out anything else about my research or anything like that, feel free to go there. I'm also on Twitter. Just got an account fairly recently, so feel free to find me there as well. And just a few things about me that will become a bit more relevant as we go along here, but so I'm currently doing a 3-year postdoc that's funded by the Swedish Research Council, and that's why I've been able to go to these fantastic places. So I'm currently right now in Flagstaff, Arizona, really beautiful place, as many of you know, and also spent time in Belgium, for example. I'll talk a bit more about that. As Tony mentioned, I'm interested in learner corpus research, register variation, research methods, research ethics, and importantly, as again we'll be returning to in a moment, I think it's really important to talk about non-academic interests too, and mine are photography, not necessarily the technical parts of it, but we're just going out and seeing beautiful things and trying to capture it. And I really love hiking. Since I moved here to Flagstaff, I've realized that I have this passion for rock climbing that I had no idea about before. So I'm really excited to have gotten a chance to try that and go rock climbing several times, and hoping to get to do that more too in the future. And I used to play basketball. I'm a basketball fan. I still play a little bit just for fun. So again, just to a little bit more background, again, that will become relevant later on. So I did my PhD at Uppsala University in Sweden, and then I had a 2-year postdoc at Louvain in Belgium as the Center for English Corpus Linguistics, and now I'm currently at Northern Arizona University. And this has been a really good experience. So just the outline. So so Learner Corpus Research, a bit about what I do and what that is in case people are new to that. And then the second half will be things that I wish that someone had told me when I was a grad student. And then I thought I would just very briefly talk about postdoc life, because since I've been asked to talk to grad students, I'm assuming that most of you are in a graduate student program at the moment. So you might be thinking about what could happen afterwards, and postdoc is definitely a possibility out there. And then I will make sure to leave plenty of time for questions and answers. So if you have questions, be very, very happy to answer them. And you're supposed to be able to answer or write through either through the chat, or perhaps better, there's a Q&A button that will make it easier for me to see which ones I've answered and which ones I haven't answered. So Learner Corpus Research, then I'll just give a brief introduction in case people aren't familiar with it, talk a bit about some general trends that's going on, and then use some of 3 of my current projects just to exemplify, to show what kinds of projects you could be working on if you're interested in Learner Corpus Research. And then I'll just very briefly mention the Learner Corpus Association and what that could be helpful for you for. So Learner Corpora are said to be systematic computerized collections of text produced by language learners. And this term language learners is a bit hard to define in some ways, because who is a language learner? Am I a language learner? I'm not a native speaker of English, and so on. And in some definitions, I am. But most commonly, when we talk about learner language, we talk about students of some subject. So high school students, university students who are studying something, typically in learner corpus research, we have tended to focus a lot on, especially in a European context, on students of English linguistics or students of English, but that doesn't have to be the case in any way. So systematic, meaning that the texts included in the corpus were not just picked at random, they were selected on the basis of several criteria, for example, learner level, learner's first language. So maybe we're only interested in learner language from students who are in their first year of university or their fourth year or whatever, or students who have or from a certain language background. So they might have German as their first language, or Spanish as their first language, or Portuguese, or something like that. Or we're interested in everything, and then we want to make sure that we're keeping track to make sure that we can then at a later stage focus on only perhaps the Portuguese speakers that are writing in English or something like that. And we want to make sure that the selection is representative and balanced. If we're interested in, and we're going to return to this in a moment, but if we're interested in learner language and perhaps looking at interlanguage and things like that, then only sampling, only taking text from warm registers such as argumentative essays might not be the best way to go, because then we're only getting information about learners from this one register, when in fact we should be looking at other registers as well. So learner corpus research then, so this all got started, at least under the name Learner Corpus Research. There's been similar kinds of research going on elsewhere too, but got started back in the 90s, where when Sylviane Granger started the Center for English Corpus Linguistics, the CECO, at UC Louvain, so Université Catholique de Louvain in Belgium, in Louvain-la-Neuve. And she's still very much active there. She's technically retired, except she's really not. She's, I think she's editing 3 volumes right now or something like that, and I don't know how many research projects she has going on top of that. We have other researchers there, like 𝗟𝗃𝗃𝗃, Magali Paco, for example, many others. And so this is one important center for learner corpus research, but there are of course others, and there's a lot of learner corpus research being done elsewhere, but this is just an important place. And we tend to, most of the studies in learner corpus research tend to, at least traditionally have tended to look at some language background, one or several, and compare that to native speakers and or expert writers. And expert writers could be native speakers or just someone who is at an expert level enough that they can publish in a journal, for example. And learner corpus research tends to, or the corpora that we use, so the collections of text tend to be really rich in terms of metadata. So we tend to have information about the students' first language background, but maybe even their parents' language backgrounds, what languages they grew up speaking, what languages were used at school, how many years have they spent, the students, that is not the parents necessarily, but the students spent studying English at school, how many years have they spent or months have they spent abroad, and background information of that kind, which makes for really interesting, potentially very interesting studies, and where you look at subsets of your data in a way that is not really possible in other kinds of, using other corpora, where you might just have one. I mean, there's no way of kind of subsampling or using subsets of your corpora. You're just using the whole corpora or nothing, kind of. But in learner corpus research, we tend to have enough information about each participant that we can do that. Traditionally, it's been fairly descriptive, fairly exploratory, and part of the reason for this is that when it all got started back in the 90s and later on, there's just so much to look at, because compared to previous research where, so in second language acquisition, sometimes you'd find, I mean, less perhaps now, but at least back then, you'd have maybe 10 participants, 20 participants, maybe up to 50, 60 participants, but learner corpus research, you'd have 300, 500, 5,000 people and their production. And so it really lend itself really well for these exploratory studies, but we might gonna return to this. So we might want to move towards more kind of theory-based research too at this point. So we have, of course, spoken corpora and written learner corpora. So spoken corpora are tend to be hard to compile. It takes a lot of time to compile, which means that we have much fewer. There are, I think, 20% spoken and 70% written or something like that in a survey that was done some years ago. And so we need more spoken corpora to find out what's going on in learner spoken production too. And as you probably know, spoken meaning you record someone talking, and then you transcribe the data and use the transcriptions then to do the analyses. In some cases, you have the audio and even the video paired up with the written data and so on. But then we tend to work with written data. There's been less work done so far on production from the same learner. So we have, for example, say someone who has German as their first language, writing in German and in English to see if maybe the things that are going on in their English could be explained by things that they also do in their first language, in their German. And that's there's some projects going on right now working on that, but we really need more work on that. And I think it's a really interesting topic to explore. And part of the reason why it hasn't received much attention so far is that we need corpora that can actually, where you have the students' first language and second language production, and there aren't particularly many such corpora. And then task and register, some people would perhaps merge the two, but just different kinds of writing. So are we looking at argumentative essays? Are we looking at methodology recounts? Are we looking at case studies and so on? So there are many different registers that learners can produce. And traditionally, because of the corpora that we have used in the past, we have primarily focused on argumentative essays, which means that a lot of what we know about learner language is based on that one register. And it would be helpful to have more information from other registers too. So, some recent trends then in learner corpus research that I've noticed and other people have noticed is that we're moving away a bit from this kind of binary distinction between non-native speakers and native speakers, where we only look at underuse and overuse, and are the learners, the non-native speakers, are they doing a good job, or what's going on? We're moving somewhat away from that and including, for example, expert writing instead, which might not have much to do with native speaker status. And then we also see studies looking at the impact of register, as I mentioned, task type, whether or not those are separate, and discipline too. So so as I said, a lot of research has been done on students of English, and now we have more information about people who are non-native speakers who study chemistry or biology or something like that. So that's really exciting. We also see a lot more sophisticated statistical techniques, which is good from one perspective in that we want increased literacy, statistical literacy, and we want to make sure that we have methodologically sound studies, but it can also go a bit overboard. And I'm involved in a project that we're working on right now with two colleagues here, where we have looked to see in corpus linguistics in general, so not specifically at learner corpus research, but corpus linguistics, and where we're seeing that we're perhaps as a field moving away from focusing on linguistics, focusing language, because we're spending a bit more time and effort and words on the statistical description and so on. So we want to make sure that we balance the two. And let me find the cursor. We're also, I guess, moving closer towards second language acquisition, so more kind of theory-based. So this is learner corpus research then, which I think could be good. We have a lot to learn from each other, and also a lot that can be done in terms of collaborations and so on. And I know 𝗪𝗲𝗃𝗂𝗃, for example, is involved in some projects, for example, an edited volume on that. And I'm gonna, just to exemplify or give you some examples of studies that can be done in Learner Corpus Research, I would just very, very briefly talk about 3 projects that I'm currently working on. And the first one is on adverb placement, second one is on register, and third one is on core vocabulary, and with different collaborators. So the first project then on adverb placement, this is a fairly big project that started out just Magali and me, and then 𝗪𝗲𝗃𝗂𝗃 and me, and then kind of grew into this international collaboration, which has been really, really fun to be part of. And so we have, me, 𝗕𝗿𝗇𝗶𝗹 𝗪𝗲𝗃 from University of Oslo, 𝗪𝗲𝗃𝗂𝗃, 𝗫𝗵𝗵𝗵𝗃𝗃 from University of Barcelona, Marcus Callies, University of Bremen, Natalia Judith Lasso from University of Barcelona, and Sanne van Vuuren from Radboud University. So these are all, if you're new to Learner Corpus Research, these people are people who have published a lot in Learner Corpus Research. They could be good names to Google. And we're all part of this corpus compilation project called 𝗪𝗲𝗃, the Varieties of English for Specific Purposes database. And this project then is on adverb placement, like I said. So we looked at epistemic adverbs, 15 of them, to see where in a clause they occur. So clearly, if it's sentence initial, clause initial, clause medial, clause final, and then we have 3 clause medial positions, and what's going on there, with the thinking that we have these different L1 backgrounds, so first language backgrounds. So I was in charge of the Swedish data, and Hilde of the Norwegian, Magali of the French speaking Belgian data, and so on. So we had all these first language backgrounds, and these language backgrounds are fairly different from one another. So for example, in Swedish and Norwegian, we tend to place a lot of things sentence initially or clause initially in a way that wouldn't really make sense in English. For example, we could have possibly is the equivalent is almost always found clause initially in Swedish and Norwegian. So then maybe we could find that the learners, the L1 Swedish and Norwegian learners, when they write in English, maybe they transfer that to their English, unlike maybe then the French speakers or the Spanish speakers and so on. And if that's the case, then there we can see evidence of language L1 transfer. So we looked at epistemic adverbs, 15, so clearly, possibly, probably, for example. We had 6 different L1s, plus a reference corpus. We had both written and spoken data, and we focused primarily on L1 transfer, but also looking at register and lexical features. So what happens if we have an auxiliary in that clause? Does that affect things? What happens if we have other adverbials or adverbs in that clause? What's going on there? And just to give you the brief version of the results. So native speaker status didn't matter actually at all, meaning that overall the learners did just as well or as poorly as the native speaker students. L1 transfer, jury's kind of out. There were some instances where for example, the Swedish and Norwegian students tended to use some patterns that are more kind of Swedish and Norwegian than English like, but there were so few of them that it didn't actually make much of a difference. And in terms of the overall picture, not enough for there to be differences between non-native speakers and native speakers. And then but we did find really clear differences between registers, in this case, mode, so written versus spoken. And we also found clear differences when it came to the lexical features. For example, auxiliaries played a major part there. So take-home message here is don't just look at native speaker status. In this case, we wouldn't have found anything. So the other factors are more interesting, at least in our study. So moving on to the second one, this is a study that actually we just submitted yesterday. It's a multidimensional analysis looking at register variation in learner writing. So again, 𝗪𝗲𝗃𝗂𝗃, and then also Doug Biber from NEU. Northern Arizona University. And what we did was that we created or built these new dimensions using the learner data rather than comparing it to the 𝗏𝗏𝗃 1980 dimensions. Those of you who are familiar with MDA. So we built these new dimensions using only the learner data to see, okay, what's going on in the learner data. And our hypothesis based on previous research was that learner writing is involved, meaning there are a lot of excuse me, first person pronouns, I, and so on. There's a lot of mental verbs such as think, so I think that, and those kinds of structures, and that's what previous research has found. And the rationale there is that it's hard, of course, to write. It's harder to write in a second language than it is to write in your first language, and it's even harder to get the register right. So it's not perhaps a given that the learners would have good register awareness. But as it turns out, the learners do actually get the register right. So the hypothesis, it turns out, is based on studies of one register primarily, so argumentative texts, meaning that yes, argumentative texts tend to be involved, but if we take other registers into consideration, then we get a very different picture. And also when we control for register, we didn't find much in terms of native speaker status differences either. So third study, I see that I have received a question now, but I'm not going to look at that now. I'm going to wait for until the end of the talk, because otherwise I would have to go back and forth between the windows, just so whoever asked that question knows that I'll attend to that in just after the presentation, so in a little while. Okay, so third study, one that I did with Sylviane Granger, and this is us presenting it last year. It's on physiology, and our thinking there was that we have all these taboo words, so thing and things, for example, those are words that we shouldn't use in academic writing because they're too informal, they're too vague. Really, and but what we found is that when we allow for a bigger section of or larger chunk of words, so multi-word sequence, then the problems, I mean, they don't fully disappear perhaps, but the thing and things expressions are actually fairly specific. So we have expressions like all things considered, all things being equal. And the point here was that we were trying to show that we can't just, when we make claims about informal uses and so on, we can't just look at individual words. We need to take the physiological context into consideration. Okay, so just actually two slides on, but very brief ones on the Learner Corpus Association. So if there's anyone who is either currently doing Learner Corpus research or who is interested in learning more and doing more, I would recommend joining the Learner Corpus Association. It's an international association where aiming to promote the field of Learner Corpus research and support compilation of learner corpora, their methods and tools and new methods and tools coming out. And just in terms of, we can talk about findings and you can share your findings. There is a bibliography where you can find all studies that have been published in the whatever 20 years, something like that, in Learner Corpus Research. So it's really great if you're doing that kind of research, or if you're interested in starting to doing it. And it also has a website, so you get information about conferences and so on. There's hopefully, assuming COVID doesn't cause any trouble, but there's supposed to be a conference in Padua in Italy in, I think, in September. it's next year anyway. No, yeah, the next year, so not this September, but the year after. And good news, it's free for PhD students and MA students for now, at least. They might have to start charging in a couple of years, but for now it's free, and it's not very expensive if you are faculty. So it's 30 euros, which is more or less the same as $30 US dollars if you're faculty. So consider joining, and this is just what the website looks like, and you can just Google Learner Corpus Association and you'll get to this. Good, okay, so turning then to the second half of the talk, or which is are things that I wish that someone had told me when I was a grad student. And I generally had a very good experience being a grad student, but I know that it's very stressful, or can be very stressful at least, and it was for me too, even though I had a good experience overall. And so these are just some things that I think would have helped me, and so I'm very happy to get to share them with you, and I hope that they're helpful. I'm going to talk about 4 things, with the 4th being a slightly longer topic. So the first one is just a fairly simple one, namely to try to appreciate your colleagues. So, and this is something that I didn't really know when I was a student, but that I think so much of our time as PhD students is spent thinking, okay, how do I get a good enough CV so as to be able to get a job afterwards? How do I make sure that I don't fall behind? Oh, everyone else is doing these really cool things, and they're going to conferences, they're publishing, and why am I not doing that? And it's kind of stressful to try to see whatever else is going on. But I think this is the point here, is that you don't have any control over who your competition will be when you're out on the job market. But what you have control over is who your potentially lifelong friends will be. So I think trying to not be competitive with people in your program is really something that I would strongly recommend, and try instead to form close bonds, and just help people out. What goes around comes around, and we just make for a nicer experience in general. And in all likelihood, when you're up for a job, you're going to have competition from some completely unknown person somewhere that you had no idea even existed. So I think it would be smart not to spend too much time focusing on people around you, and if you're behind or something like that. And then just in general, be a good colleague, take responsibility for the working environment, which makes it so much more enjoyable for you and your colleagues. I know, for example, that I've heard from Claudia that there's a really good research environment at 𝗏𝗏 University, and the environment is really nice here at NEU. But you can really be wherever you are. You can really be the person that changes the research environment and the work environment for the better, and it just makes for such a more nicer experience for everyone involved. And this is something that I was actually told to do this, but I have a lot of friends who were told not to do this, so I thought I would include this, and that is to go to conferences and go on research days. And people who were told not to do this by their advisors, the personnel there, was that it takes so much time, so you should be focusing on your thesis and on your writing. But and going to conferences, you have to, it takes time to travel, it takes time to prepare, it takes time just while you're there. You're not going to be able to work on your whatever projects, and I'm going to say totally worth it. Don't perhaps overdo it, but definitely worth it to go to conferences and research days. And so the main reason why I see that is that it helps us challenge truths. So we have a lot of truths that come from our parents, our culture, our schooling, and now at university from our advisors, from our program. And they're actually not truths. They're preferences, habits, at least 99% of the time. And if we never challenge them, then we believe that they are truths. And I think in my case, this is very clear to me every time. I mean, I showed you my trajectory, and before that, I did my master's and undergrad at another university before Uppsala. And I think every time I moved from one university to another, I have learned a lot, and I've questioned a lot of things that I've learned. For example, in my undergrad, there's just one person doing corpus linguistics, and the other people were more into generative grammar, for example, which is, as you know, very different. So what I learned about, or I knew about syntax, for example, and grammar came from a generativist tradition, and then I moved towards corpus work, and that's, yeah. Anyway, so challenged a lot of truths there. And of course, conferences and talking to people means meeting people you wouldn't necessarily have met otherwise, different socioeconomic backgrounds, academic backgrounds, and just makes for a better experience and a richer and more inclusive experience in general. So network, I don't particularly like it when people say, oh, you have to network. It's, you have to go talk to people just so that, because you never know if they're going to be able to help you in the future. I see it more as try to make friends, because it's nice to have friends in academia. And sure, if you want to invite someone later, if they want to invite you or something, then sure, I guess that's something you get out of that. That's not just friendship, but I think focus on the friendship part would be my advice, and just try to get to know people, because you have a lot to learn. We all do from each other, and it's a nice opportunity to do so. And it's nice, of course, if someone has something interesting going on, they have a new project or something, and you're the first person, or at least the third something person they think of when they're like, okay, I have this project. I'm going to ask this person because I talked to them at a conference and they seemed really nice and knowledgeable, or something like that. Right. So third one is, and this is a more of a personal one, where to know and accept your strengths and weaknesses. And I think, at least for me, you hear, okay, you need to know what your weaknesses are. But I would like to add, you need to know what your strengths and weaknesses are, and also you need to know and accept your strengths and weaknesses. And in my case, I tend to be really impressed, or I've tended in the past at least, and I guess I still am, but now I've come to accept that part. But be really impressed by people who can think on their feet, meaning people who can just go into a meeting and say really good things, and who can, in discussion can be like, yeah, sure, I'll to be able to come up with the things on the fly. And I'm not really that person. I'm sure I like meetings, but I need more time. I need to think things through. I need to maybe write things down and so on. So that's I guess a weakness that I have, but I've now come to accept it, and it doesn't make me any less smart than someone who's really good at thinking on their feet or something like that. But that's taken me a long time, and this is just one example. I mean, I have many other weaknesses and strengths that I'm not bringing up here, but this is just an example that something that really affected me for a long time in academia, because I thought that I wasn't as smart as the people who could, in class, when I was a grad student in class, who would just say these like really smart things. I'm like, give me 2 hours to think about that, and I'll get back to you. And so my advice here would be to try to identify these strengths and weaknesses, to be able to either try to accept them if you can't really do much about them, or try to find ways of working around them. So for this particular example, I sometimes say, I will be in a meeting and I would say something like, yeah, let me think about that and get back to you with answers on that. Let's set up another meeting and we can talk more about it. And then that gives me time to think things through and and not feel pressured to deliver right then and there. It doesn't always work because sometimes you really do have to deliver then and there, but when I can, I do that. And then this is the final, but also the somewhat longer version. I won't go on for too long though, to make sure we have time for questions. And that is something that I have come to learn fairly recently. I did not have this down as a PhD student, let me tell you. And that is to aim for good work-life balance. And so the kind of bottom line is that you have to try to find a way of working in academia, assuming you want to stay in academia, but I'm going to assume that for the time being, that a way of working in academia that suits you, because working 80-hour weeks and not getting any sleep at all that's not good for anyone. That's not suiting anyone. So that should not be anyone's life really, because it's not healthy. So the idea is that you have to try to form habits that can that you can actually maintain. We're going to talk more about this. And if you don't, you're going to form habits that are hard to break. If you, as a PhD student, as a grad student, feel like you have to work really, really, really hard, then it's kind of only going to get worse, because you're going to get more things on your plate and so on. So if you have, if you're already overworked as a grad student, it is not good for the rest of your career. And so we have this myth too that I just thought I would mention, that if I only get this done, then, so if I only finish this chapter of my thesis, then I'll be happy. If I only finish preparing for this class, then I can take some time off. If I only, and that kind of thing. And the reason I say that this is a myth is that sure, you'll get that there, you'll finish that chapter, you finish that course prep or whatever, but then you're going to have 5 other things that you're going to be like, okay, if only I get these things done, then I'll be happy. And I think if we live in this state where we have is always kind of happiness is always on the horizon, and the horizon keeps on moving, then we can't really ever be happy or live a more of a stress-free life. So I think it's really, really important to try to take time off when we can now, and just try to, not just wait for happiness to come at some later stage, because then it might never come, because we tend not to ever get fully caught up. At least I haven't since I started. And that's stressful from one perspective, but it's also kind of nice, because if you're anything like me, I get easily bored. I don't think I've ever been bored at work since the day I started. So academia it can be stressful, but it also means that there's always something to do, and you're likely never to be bored, which is fantastic and not true in that many other jobs. So just thought I would briefly talk about this way of handling trying to get this work-life balance thing. So in my case is something that I put together with my ex-boyfriend, where we were together, we were both academics, and we could never see each other because we were always working, and it was just very stressful. And when we weren't working, we were feeling guilty about not working. And the rule that we came up with was just one simple rule, and we can never work past 6 p.m. Meaning that if it's 6 p.m., that's no more work. Doesn't matter how many deadlines we have coming up or how stressed we are or whatever. So and what that has done is, it's actually, it sounds kind of silly perhaps, but it's life-changing, and it has been life-changing. I have every evening off guilt-free. That hasn't happened since I was 13 or something like that. And we've kept this going now for 2.5 years. What that does mean is that we have to be more mindful of our time, because we only have time then to work during the day. I tend to work well in the morning, so I need to make sure that I free up time in the morning to get writing done and so on. So I try to answer emails after lunch if I can. I try to schedule meetings after lunch if I can. So I think just some advice here would be to try to find your productive time and use it wisely, because using, for example, to-do lists and so on. And also part of this is not a rule, but something that's part of our agreement is to try to only work on fun tasks on the weekend. So if you have to work on the weekend, we really shouldn't, because we're not really paid to do that. But if we have to work on the weekend, then my ex-boyfriend and I decided to only do fun tasks, the things that we thought were fun, which made it more. So just some things, final slide on this here. So being a PhD student is stressful for most of us, but it's kind of gonna speed up a bit once you get a permanent position, and which means that you need to develop skills to be able to handle this. And some part of that could be to say no, even to fun projects, which is, I mean, it sounds like it's super easy. It's really not. But make sure to always say yes to spending time with friends and family. And another thing is to actually be honest with people. If you don't have time, let the other person know, because I think that it's good for all of us to be more transparent when it comes to these things. To actually be honest, say, okay, I have a little bit too much right now, but I'm very happy to get to it next week or whenever. Or you can ask your advisor, if you're a grad student, to help you prioritize. Okay, I have way too many things to do right now. What do you think is most urgent? And final point here is just give yourself a bit of a break, literally and metaphorically. If you're stuck, don't try to force it. Go for a walk, go for a run, do something else that's not work, and just allow yourself that time off. And this is another myth that people are productive 100% of the time. That's not true whatsoever. So don't try to be productive for 100% of the time, because it's not going to be very easy to do. I'm just going to skip. So I have a blog post I was asked to write for not for 𝗔𝗘𝗪 actually, but for the Graduate Student Association of 𝗃𝗶𝗹𝗂. Is that 𝗔𝗘𝗪? Larsson. Anyway, so I was asked to write this blog post, and you can Google it and you can find it, and I won't spend time talking about that now. And I have some slides on postdocs, but I can maybe answer that in the Q&A.